Okay, let's make a start there then. Well, good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome to our AEC webinar, the first in a series of AEC webinars running throughout 2023. Thank you for joining, and obviously thank you for taking the time out of your busy days to be with us. My name is Craig Evenden. I head up our architecture, engineering and construction practice at Esri UK, and I'm going to be hosting today's webinar. I'm not alone though. I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague Tash Senior, who will be doing a lot of the heavy lifting and shifting in today's webinar. Tash will be providing all of today's demos. We're also delighted to be joined by Emily Hall from Costain. Emily is a GIS consultant, and Emily will be providing a really cool presentation on biodiversity net gain in our customer spotlight. It's worth saying that Emily is standing in for Katie Dawson, who is unable to join us today. I also just want to quickly recognise Ali Hughes in our marketing team. Ali is our AEC marketing executive and has been helping with the logistics for today's webinar. So just a little bit of housekeeping. It's worth saying we are live and this is being recorded. It will be shared online for those who are registered for today's webinar, but are maybe unable to join us live as we speak. We are running an online Q&A via Slido, so please scan the QR code that's on the screen on your smartphone or tablet. Equally, you can just type in the URL there on the screen in your browser. You can post your questions during the session or at the end. We will have that Q&A at the end following Emily's presentation to answer any of your questions. If you feel comfortable, I would encourage you to put your name and organisation down, just so that if we can't answer your question today, we can at least then follow up with you at a later date. Equally, as I said, because this is being recorded, if you don't feel comfortable to put your name or organisation down, that's absolutely fine. There'll be an opportunity to reach out to us after the webinar as well. So I guess just kind of setting the scene really, why an ecology webinar for us when we're thinking about the first in a series of webinars for us this year? Well, as survey season kicks off, we know how important it is to ensure the planning, design, construction and management of assets are done in a way that protects our environment. That's why we're excited to bring you an ecology webinar that explores how technology can help drive efficiencies in the surveying process. We'll be focusing on ecology workflows and scenarios, but it's important to say that the principles and workflows we highlight can be applied to any specialty really. Our goal, I guess, for this webinar is to provide you with some practical insights and tools that can help you streamline your workflows and achieve better outcomes for our planet. We believe as well that we've got some pretty cool tech that we can share with you that will hopefully make this a really relevant and engaging session. So just looking at the agenda quickly then, Tash will start with a workflow demonstration where you'll learn about the latest tips and tricks for efficient surveying. Next, we'll shift gears to a product focus on Suite for ArcGIS. This is a powerful tool. If you haven't seen Suite before, it can help streamline your workflows and achieve better project outcomes. And then, as I mentioned, we'll switch gears again to our customer spotlight presentation from Emily, where she'll share her team's experiences with biodiversity net gain, GIS implementation, and the common challenges she's encountering. We'll wrap up the session with some useful resources and signposts to future Esri events, so you can stay up to date with the latest trends and technologies in the GIS space. And of course, we'll save plenty of time at the end for that Q&A session where you can ask any burning questions. So I guess we just wanted to start with a quick poll just to get a sense of who's joining us on today's call and to give you a sense of, well, who else is out there and what's their surveying experience like at the moment. So we're just going to flick to the poll. So here it is there. And the first question we've got for you is, how do you primarily collect survey data at the moment? How do you primarily collect survey data? So pen and paper, Esri, could be any of our applications, spreadsheets, custom-made apps, off-the-shelf apps, open source technology, or maybe you're using another form of method to collect your surveys. So, well, that's a good sign. The majority of people are using Esri technology, so hopefully you'll find something relevant in here for you today. And I don't think it's too surprising that we're seeing quite a high percentage of pen and paper, because I think while we'd like to see as much of this workflow be streamlined for technology, the pen is still very powerful, and we understand and recognise that there are still certain things that do just require a good old pen and paper. Okay, so the second question in today's poll is, how would you rate the effectiveness of your current survey workflow? Okay, so that's pretty good. So yeah, the more than half people are pretty happy with their current workflow. So that's a really good sign. And yeah, only a few people feeling that I guess they could improve that. So as I said, hopefully you'll find within this session today some tips and tricks that maybe could move you to that feeling ecstatic about the effectiveness of your current workflows. And finally, the last poll, because we recognise that, you know, for many of you, survey season kicks off very shortly. For some of you, I'm sure it started already and it carries on all year round. But just to get a sense of, on average, how often are you carrying out surveys as a business? It might not be you as an individual, but it might be your organisation. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. I think we're seeing that more and more from customers that we work with, that these surveys are pretty mission critical to your business, and therefore we'd expect to see a daily usage on these surveys for most people. But still a nice spread. I mean, I guess, yeah, there's not many people that are doing these surveys, maybe more than a monthly occurrence. Cool. Okay, well, hopefully that gives a sense of how people are getting on with their surveys and who's joining us on the call today. So I'm gonna pass to Tash to take us through her demonstration today.
Brilliant. Thanks, Craig. Good morning, everyone. I am Tash Senior, and I work in our pre-sales team here at Esri UK. I've got a background in biodiversity and conservation, so I'm excited to show you today how we can leverage GIS to help you with some of those ecology and environmental workflows. So in this first segment, I will be showcasing an end-to-end workflow of how to leverage GIS within and going into survey season. Now, this is an iterative process that you'll likely be actioning in some form, as we saw before, whether that's paper forms or spreadsheets. But we'll look at how GIS can tie this all together into a streamlined workflow. So firstly, your ecologist will be capturing survey data in the field, like habitat baseline or species surveys. Now, as GIS teams, you will want to be preparing the data for your ecologist to ensure it's collected in the best format to save time in the field. And once it's collected, project managers or species leads will be monitoring this in the office to track the progress of fieldwork and ensure data is valid with a robust QA process. Next, this data needs to be assessed against guidelines, so that could be environmental guidelines or biodiversity net gain. And the last part of this workflow is automating parts by leveraging machine learning. So this is something we're seeing more customers wanting to adopt to increase the overall efficiencies. It may not be currently part of your workflow, but something that you are hoping to do. So let's jump into the first part of the process, which is capturing survey data in the field for habitat baseline. So establishing a biodiversity baseline can provide the information needed to mitigate biodiversity risk, responsibly manage a site, and identify biodiversity creation at a later stage. So there has been this shift from phase 1 habitat survey to UK HAB classification, which is being adopted across the AEC industry. So how can we use GIS to capture UK HAB data? So what we can see here is a UK HAB app using field maps, which can be deployed to your ecologists. So we can see here a HS2 section, and around that we've got specific zones which you may be contracted out to go and survey. So as we zoom into a section here, ecologists may want to understand a specific zone. So as we click onto that title, we've got lots of rich information on tenure, proprietary address and name. You could also have accessibility information in here. And what we've done is we have created a UK HAB app by bringing in the schema. So you can capture polygon habitats like freshwater, marine, terrestrial, and all of those linear habitats. So as I select that polygon there, we can see that orange dot snapping to that zone outline. We can also use imagery base maps to help delineate that, that specific habitat baseline out in the field. And this is increasing that overall accuracy. So here we've brought in that UK HAB classification. That out in the field, it may be raining, so you may want to adopt some other ways like using voice notes to summarize what you found out in the field. And as we go in and add in our classification system, we've got our terrestrial answers here, so we can select woodland and forest there. And we've got those recommended answers in that level 3 there. So as we jump to level 4, we can see those recommended values for coniferous. But we may want to change that. So if we change that to broadleaf there, we can see that it's understanding that underlying schema and recommending those values associated with that specific level 3. So you can see there that level 5 is locked. It's the end of that specific data hierarchy. But we can also go in and add secondary habitats. So we've got that status field under there, so that's read only under review. So that feeds into that next stage of the process that we saw within that cycle before. So now that we've got that habitat baseline in there, out in the field, we may want to add another point. And we can see that orange dot is not just snapping to the zones, but also to that previous baseline that's just been digitized. So we can see there again, it's improving the accuracy, but it's not tracing along that zone. So again, it's only as good as how many vertices you put in. What we can see as well is that the symbology as well that's brought in is very high level. You can bring in some of this symbology if you wanted to use Arcade in ArcGIS Pro. So if we jump back to that UK HAB schema, so this has been created with this data hierarchy using bringing in the domains into ArcGIS Pro and leveraging contingent values in order to keep this this underlying data hierarchy between those levels and different values that you're inputting. So being out in the field as well, you can use field maps to increase efficiencies by copying those attributes. So you may have a similar habitat baseline nearby. So you can go in and copy that over. So I'll just discard that for now. And the last thing that I wanted to show you here is being able to create markups. So we can improve that communication. Ecologists out in the field may have seen other areas that are necessary to survey. So we can add areas and notes. So in this one, we saw some badger sets. So again, we can add that label to help those next ecologists or those in the office know where they need to survey next. So this jumps me nicely into our next part of capturing survey data in the field, which is capturing ad hoc species surveys. So this could be the likes of bat roosts to great crested newts to badger sets. So here we've used Survey 123, which is our smart form app. So we can see here we've got lots of supplementary information and images for those out in the field. We can go in and add those survey details. So we've got a list of surveyors, but as we type, we can start to automate that. We can add in that ID or auto-populate it. We can see that it's brought in that date and time of survey, which we can go and adjust if we, carried that out an hour earlier. So we can close these groups to really clean up that capturing of data and show in terms of those badger sets. As we select other, we've got that conditional visibility. So this purpose, we're just going to select those main sets, and we can add those indicators. So if it's a footprint, and as we select other, again, we're feeding into this conditional visibility. So it's providing that additional question to add more information. So just really providing a clean form for those out in the field to use. So we can now add an image. That may be something that you are taking from your phone or device, or something that you previously captured. So here we've got some nice badger footprints. We can go and start to annotate this. So we've got a great toolbox here of lines and different stencils to again improve that communication. We can change the palette. This is something you can customize to your organization if you wish as well, to really make sure you've got that consistency across the board. So here I can add in my labels. And then I may want to add in a measurement tool to just show the scale of that image. So it's all about improving that communication between the field and the office there. So now I'm going to add in the location. So we can see here we've got that flashing light there, which is showing my current location. I can move it as such. So we're going to zoom into where we had that markup before in that field maps. And click done there. So Survey 123 offers lots of different types of questions. So we've got Likert scales there. We've got the approval process, so read only again, which is feeding into that next part of the process, and adding in that signature there. So moving on to that second stage of the process is monitoring and QA in the office. So this could be habitat baseline monitoring or species survey monitoring. So for this, I'm going to jump into a live demo here. So here we've got a habitat survey completions dashboard where we can see an overview of all those ad hoc surveys. But also along the top, we can jump into those which are under review for our habitat baseline, or those which have needed validation. So this is a one-stop glance at it, but this can allow you to jump into other applications to help with that QA process. So here I've got an experience builder, which has got several filters on it. So I can see, just refresh that there. We've got some filters of whether our habitat baseline is under review here, and it's panning to it. If there is a validation that's necessary, and it's jumping to that specific baseline that we have created. So here we've got our editor widget, so I can turn on that tooltips. And as we select the feature here, we can see what has been captured out in the field. Now, as a species lead or project manager, I could go in and edit this. So I could edit that secondary habitat. But I can also go in and alter that geometry there. So I can change it. And as I'm changing it, we can see that distance and area updating as we wish. I can now change that to approved and update that so it's gone through that QA process. We've also got another dashboard which is just showing the ad hoc surveys. And what I wanted to show for this particular one is the ability to change the selectors here to a specified kind of feature status, and the ability to download that data, so take a snapshot of it. So if I can download that source data, what it's doing is providing this as an Excel, which I can then use in different parts of the process. So if I jump back over to the slides, the next part of the process is assessing against guidelines, which is biodiversity net gain. So this is leaving the environment in a better state than when you originally came after that area. So I'm not going to go into this in too much detail because Emily will take a deep dive later. But at a high level, GIS can be a powerful visualization tool, turning the outputs from this metric that you may be familiar with in the Excel into a visualization tool for decision making and enabling that collaboration between different teams. So whether that's landscape designers or ecologists. So this is one of Costain's, which is an experience builder. So the last part of the process is automating with machine learning. So one scenario could be automating capturing habitat classification for ground truthing in the field. So this could really improve efficiencies for next season. So you may already own archives of your own imagery or are wanting to capture site imagery using drones or site scan. So you can kickstart this automation process by leveraging the range of pre-trained learning models within our stack. So you can see a few here in that top corner. So we've got land cover classification for Landsat 8 and Sentinel, which you can get from the Living Atlas. You can also bring these into Pro and leverage one of our Geo AI toolboxes. And you can also push this further by using it within ArcGIS Image for online, which is our imagery tools as a software as a service. You can also go this one step further and create your own land cover classification tool by training it with a wealth of your own UK HAB data and being able to classify your images into the right format. So another scenario that you could look at is habitat baseline change detection. So you may want to be assessing images year on year. There's obviously potentially a 2-year expiry with a lot of this ecology data. You could also be wanting to assess some of the imagery pre-current or post-development for reporting purposes. And so once you've got your years, you may have different classifications from that. And this can allow you to put it into a bespoke raster function editor that's available in Pro or ArcGIS Image for online. So here we're using our change detection tools to assess those different years in terms of those different images. So one of my tips here is a great thing is to leverage some of the content that's already available and out there. So we've got our global land cover data sets and the Environment Agency's vegetation object model, which is showing all of the trees across the UK. So you can start to bring that into your raster functions in order to create a more comprehensive output. So that was very much kind of a whistle-stop tour of a survey season workflow demonstration. I'll just leave some of those, some of the products that we use there on the screen. So this is going to segue me nicely into our product spotlight, which is Suite for ArcGIS, which we can find covers a lot of this workflow. So Suite for ArcGIS is our powerful web editing application. This was actually produced by Esri UK. And in terms of what it helps you to do, so we've seen quite a few apps already today. And if some of these points kind of point out to you, so if you would like to stop the creation of bad data and ensure there's better quality of your data, so very much making sure that your data is valid at the point of capture, then Suite is a really great option because it starts to help save time on that second stage of that process, of that quality assurance process. And also it helps to provide better data for analysis and business decisions. So some of the core principles of Suite for ArcGIS is that your data is valid at the point of entry. So this is because you can start to build in your own business rules behind Suite, and you can use the topology rules for this. You could use attribute rules and also our dynamic feedback, which I will show you in a demo. The editing tools are also really simple, so anyone can use them. You don't necessarily need to be a GIS user or be aware of what GIS is. And these editing applications should be easy to deploy. So let me jump into a quick demo here. So what we've got here is our phase 1 habitat survey Suite app. So again, this is just an example here. So in terms of the interface for Suite, it's very intuitive. Along the top here, we've got our digitizing tools where you can go and create your data. Along the side here, we have got our custom panels, so we can add boundaries. This one we could add in plans, so you may have paper plans that you want to digitize over to really kickstart that digital process. And lots of different aspects here. So here we've got a message board as well to tell you if there's any kind of errors when you're trying to digitize your data. Along the bottom here, we've got the location and also some snapping tools and rulers here. So if I just jump into digitizing here, we've got our different boundaries, so different survey areas. And in terms of the draw modes, we've got lots of different ones here. So we've got standard, and in this case, I'm going to click follow. So we can see here we've got our zones, which we're familiar with. And as I select that here, what we can see is that it is actually tracing that zone outline. So it's picking up all of those vertices there and ensuring that it is as accurate as possible. So again, this is something that could be done in the office before those ecologists go out. And again, it's making sure that data is valid at the point of capture. So going out into the field, I may then want to collect our phase 1 habitat data. So we can see lots of options here. So I can select that neutral grassland, and as I start to digitize, it doesn't matter that I go outside that survey extent, because it's understanding the rules behind it, those topology rules, and it's snapping to that survey area. So similarly, if I was to add another data set here, so if I was to go on and digitize it here, so let's do this very nice and roughly, even as I'm going into another phase 1, again, it's snapping to that specific area. Now, looking into some of the attribute rules here, I can go in and change those levels. And again, it's understanding that data schema behind it. So one of the things that I wanted to also show here is obviously when you're out in the field, there may be lots who are using these sorts of applications. So if I just copy this here, but as I jump into the same app in another browser, we can see that this editing session has been locked So again, this is just making sure that all that data that's being captured is accurate, and as you're deploying this to lots of people out in the field. The last thing that I wanted to show you within our suite application is another app. And for this particular one, I wanted to show you dynamic feedback. So here we have got different panels which have been created using some arcade in the background. If I was to select a specific attribute here, if I change the type, what I wanted to show is this panel is then working on the fly to update those statistics. So whether it's the income, diversity or breakdown, showing that dynamic feedback. And the last thing that I wanted to show you today as well was another part of dynamic feedback, which is as I go in, I may want to add in some water features. And as I'm starting to edit here, we can see it's bringing back that loss of income there. So it's allowing you to make decisions as you edit before you are committing, which could be really valid as you're looking towards potentially creating a biodiversity net gain application in the future. So that's a nice segue to jump me back to my slides there, and to introduce our next speaker, which is Emily Hall, which will speak to you about biodiversity net gain.
That's great, thank you, Tash. I'm just going to flick over to share my slides now, so if you could just let me know if/when you can see them, that'd be fab.
Looks good.
Yeah, looks good. Fab, thank you. Okay, good morning, everyone. I'll jump straight in. So thanks for staying on for this part of the webinar as well. I'm going to talk a little bit about GIS for improved support for biodiversity net gain. So I'm a GIS consultant with Costain, and I support on the biodiversity net gain work that we do. And I'm also involved more in the natural capital side. So more recently, we've been creating a carbon sequestration GIS tool. So as Craig mentioned earlier, I'm covering this presentation for our resident biodiversity expert, Katie Dawson. She isn't able to make it today, but Katie is our GIS team lead for environment, and she's responsible for the delivery of all environmental GIS-led tools, including this digital biodiversity net gain management tool, which I will speak through. So these tools are aimed to help us make more evidence-based decisions on land use and development sites. So in this presentation, I'm going to cover these 5 things. So I'll go into the context of biodiversity net gain, a bit of a refresher for anyone or some information for people that aren't as familiar with it, our digital solution for managing biodiversity net gain, and examples of how we can use this solution, visualizations, and then I'll move on to some lessons learned and any further development that we've got planned. So we'll start with a bit of background to biodiversity net gain. So DEFRA and Natural England have developed metrics that can be used to quantify the value of particular habitats into biodiversity units. So the first thing we need to do is calculate a baseline for a site, just what's there already. Then we calculate the loss based on vegetation clearance plans, and then we look at enhancement or restoration. By removing the units of loss and then adding the units for enhanced, we get our overall net value of biodiversity units either lost or gained on site. So the units are recorded in an assessment tool, which is currently called the Biodiversity Metric 3.1, and that can be downloaded from Natural England's website, and it allows calculations of habitat, hedge, river and river biodiversity units. So we have a number of metrics that we can use for the baseline to give us our units. So we essentially take each land parcel in hectares and times them by these metrics to give us our baseline units. So the first metric is habitat distinctiveness, and this is a predetermined value based on habitat classification. So I think, as Tash mentioned earlier, we're trying to move this to UK HABs rather than phase 1. But another step in this process more recently is bringing ecologists in to help us translate that data over, because a lot of site data is still in phase 1. The distinctiveness metric includes parameters such as species richness, diversity, rarity, and the degree to which a particular habitat supports species that are rarely found in other habitats. The next metric is habitat condition. So that's assigned to habitats based on a field survey where habitats have to meet certain criteria to be classified in certain categories. So they can be classified as poor condition, good condition, moderate. And there's also metrics for connectivity of habitats and strategic significance of different habitat patches. So when we're calculating the baseline, there are a number of measures in place to make sure that we are adhering to good practice. So these are that the area has to be measured accurately and in hectares. We need to clarify any exclusions, so if there's any habitats that are irreplaceable or any designated sites within our development site. We need to record anything that can't be measured. So features such as corridors, they might not have a high biodiversity value in themselves, but they provide connectivity between habitats. So they're really important to record. Also, urban features that might be part of habitat restoration, such as green roofs and living walls, and can't necessarily be fed into this tool, but it's important to note that they're there. We need to identify limitations, so that's likely going to come from gaps in the data, although we often use land cover maps and land cover data to help counteract this. We need to take a precautionary approach, so in some cases we might need to make assumptions on the distinctiveness or condition of different habitat patches. So if assumptions are being made, we'd probably opt more for a higher tier, so instead of putting something as low distinctiveness, we might go with medium. But as long as we can justify those assumptions, so we use records, photographs to justify those condition assessments. But yeah, better to err on the side of caution. We need to be consistent, so using the same metric and data collection method for the whole project lifecycle. And finally, we need to be transparent, so show the workings of the baseline calculations with evidence and consider making data such as GIS layers available to the local environmental record centres. So still on the background of biodiversity net gain. So this is, once we've got our baseline, this is how we move on to calculating the loss and the gain. So to calculate the loss, we look at vegetation clearance data, and this should include both temporary and permanent changes on site. Any habitats that are unaffected still need to be logged as areas retained, and that will overall give us the total habitats being lost, or the total habitat units being lost on site. It's a similar thing for the gain as well. We look at the enhancement stats and figures on site and calculate our units that will be gained. So just as a bit of background to this, the concept of quantifying biodiversity isn't new, but it's ramping up a lot more. It has ramped up a lot more in the past year or so, because we've had the government's environmental bill, which is now law and requires an overall net gain in biodiversity of at least 10% as a condition of planning permission. So that 10% is called the net gain objective. And in theory, local authorities should only really improve sites that meet that net gain objective of 10%, although we do have some exemptions and sites can be constrained. So we've kind of got a bit of a hierarchy of best practice there. So the best thing that a site can do is on-site enhancements and habitat creation. So opportunity to improve distinctiveness by upgrading the existing habitats on site or improving their condition. The next step down is developers can do off-site enhancements and habitat restoration. So more constrained sites with less additional land available could go down this road. You do need to get a lot more approvals from local planning authorities and Natural England to be able to do this. And there is a penalty payment associated with doing off-site enhancements as opposed to on-site enhancements. And finally, it's quite new and it's considered a last resort, but credits can be bought. So the price of these credits is between 10 and 20,000 per biodiversity unit. So especially for big sites, that can really add up and become a big loss. So there's a lot of kind of costings to consider when looking at how biodiversity net gain is met. Also, when completing biodiversity net gain plans, which will need to be submitted to local planning authorities, they also need to demonstrate how these enhancements are going to be managed and maintained over the next 30 years. So that's another thing to consider. So moving on to how GIS can help support biodiversity net gain. So GIS has been associated with construction and infrastructure industries for decades, and it sits mostly across all sectors. But previously people have thought of GIS more as just data visualization, whereas more recently it's becoming more of an analysis tool, a land use planning and environmental management tool, and it can help us identify landscape changes over time and different land scenarios. So at Costain, we've developed a functional service that acts as a single source of truth for all our biodiversity calculations on site, and it can be edited and exported and sent off to clients and internally in different formats. So in terms of the best time to implement this tool, we found, or in theory, the design stage of a construction project is the best time because it's kind of crucial to all aspects of sustainable development, particularly for adding concepts that reduce impacts to the environment, such as habitat loss, pollution, and waste production. And by including these biodiversity values in the design stage, we can compare scenarios and make changes to the design when the costs are at the lowest. It can be a bit costly trying to add these things in after the fact. It's not always possible. A lot of sites have already kind of started construction or have begun their calculations, so we can't necessarily impact biodiversity loss in that first stage, in that vegetation clearance, but we can hopefully influence what's gained or start to do calculations for potentially off-site enhancements to other habitats. So in terms of how this works in practice, this is our experience builder in ArcGIS, in our ArcGIS enterprise. So we've got some screenshots to show you how it can be visualized. So we've first got the bigger picture of our site with the text in units, and then we've got the visualizations on the map. We can see the balance and distribution of habitats and buildings, and we can select and analyze the individual patches. We can also include graphs and an overview of our site, and we have functions such as filters. In this case, we can identify individual patches that have high distinctiveness or a low condition, and the low condition patches will then represent our opportunities for enhancement. So in the same way, we can show the loss on site, so we can record which habitats will be lost based on the vegetation clearance, and we can see this at the class level. So for example, here we can see that woodland is the highest habitat being removed in terms of biodiversity units. It's also important that here we can add in points such as remove trees. So this is kind of an unmeasurable item in terms of the habitat types, because if we've got a predominant habitat of grassland, that's what it will go down as. And they might have kind of trees scattered in that it doesn't turn it into the predominant habitat. So those trees don't necessarily count towards a calculation, but it's still important to include them because they still have an ecological benefit. We can visualize the gain in the same sort of way. And then we have this site summary, which shows all stages of the process. So this gives us a true big picture of the biodiversity net gain on site and any specific targets that are being reached. We can visualize the biodiversity units as part of each calculation, and this can be edited to include habitat details for further information. In addition, if the project has multiple schemes, a summary page at the landscape level can allow for the comparison between the different sites and an overall view of loss or gain for the entire project. Finally, in terms of offsite, we have this Habitat Networks app, which I think is in a web app format on our enterprise. And this shows all GIS data from Natural England to help us identify potential areas for offsite habitat enhancements if required. So all of these offsets would need to be approved with Natural England, but people can use this app as a starting point to start searching for sites. So that's our tool broadly, very quickly, and I'll just go through some lessons learned. So first, ecological lessons learned. So we've had a lot of lessons learned from our tool, and we're looking at implementing a number of improvements from them. So for example, all the habitats need to be now classified into the UK HABs classification system, which, as I mentioned earlier, is different from the phase 1 system. And it's likely that UK HABs doesn't exist for a lot of sites at the moment, so we'll need ecologists to do that transition. It's also important to understand the site and potential habitat creation options that are available. So doing this through GIS, inputting different parameters and inputting parameters for things like old buildings will provide options, but also justification for decisions. To further justify decision making, you can also incorporate costs and site size as further evidence. We've also got some technical lessons learned as well. So before we send ecologists to update phase 1 data, we recommend the use of remote sensing data via a desk study first. And we're also currently exploring the use of drone imagery on our sites to supplement previous phase 1 data. So this means that we as the GIS team spend less time interpreting and digitising paper maps, which can be quite laborious. It also means we're reducing the amount of time an ecologist needs to spend on site, so we're reducing their costs as well, their efficiencies, and improving safety through that digital solution. In addition, this will allow us to identify aspects of the site that can't be recorded, so for example corridors, and identify any further limitations in the data that would allow us to justify any assumptions made in that biodiversity net gain process. Little photo of a hand-drawn map there. So in summary, we've looked at the context of biodiversity net gain and how we've used GIS to support this, as well as our lessons learned. We've seen that GIS can really support analysis and provide powerful visualizations along with efficient data collection and more accurate reporting. We believe there's 2 areas now for growth in biodiversity net gain. So the first is around taking habitat type impacts into account during the design stage. This shifts the focus from just that percentage net gain and demonstrates the perspective of putting the environment first. The second is developing our technology further to do as much analysis as possible on our system. This is going to continue to improve efficiencies and help make more accurate calculations, overall improving decision making. The use of GIS for supporting biodiversity net gain is a small part of a digital transformation journey to ingrain sustainability in our daily practices. We're purposely using the term digital journey since this change is more of a cultural change around cloud-based transformational practices, and it doesn't just happen overnight. Introducing different ways of operating requires careful planning, communication, and collaboration between multidisciplinary teams across an organisation, with clear benefits and defined outcomes for each department. So undergoing this exercise can help provide valuable insights around achieving sustainable growth as part of a step change initiative around driving greener and more sustainable practices. And I think I'm slightly ahead of time, so thank you for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. I'll stop sharing my slides as well now.
Thank you, Emily. A fantastic and engaging and very topical conversation presentation that you gave there, I think. So thank you very much. We're just coming up towards the hour. So we're just going to signpost to a couple of resources and events that we think may be of relevance to you, and then we'll jump out to that Q&A. As Emily said, we're all going to be here to answer the questions the best we can. Tash, have you got the slides there? Thank you. Perfect. Yeah, so I guess the resource we wanted to point you all to is our AEC Hub. So the URL is at the bottom there. So it's aecheub.esuuk.com. This really is a one-stop shop for all of the resources that we publish and create for our community. You'll find case studies, customer case studies and presentations on there. There's a case study from Costain actually on this hub site. And there's also a really cool demo site as well, where there's a whole host of demos. These are all ungated. They're all freely available for you to use and watch. Some are videos, some are recorded demos, and some are live applications that you can have a play around with. So I'd really encourage you to look at that. And then it's also some other resources in terms of training and some of the events that we're going to throughout this year. So just looking at some of the events that are coming up for us in 2023. I see you frantically trying to find the cursor there, Tash. Thank you. So yeah, there's quite a few events coming up. So Esri and Esri UK are at Building Smart. It's taking place in Rome, but it's a virtual event as well. We're actually a partner and a sponsor of that event. There's a really cool webinar coming up next week. So this is an Esri UK technical update for customers. Some of you may have seen this. It's being hosted by our very own Alicia Vaz in the AEC team. And this is looking at a lot of the core technology, so things like Pro, Desktop, Enterprise, Online, some of the field apps that Tash has shown today, and giving you an update about this technology, what's come in the latest release, what's the new functionality and capability available within there. So it's free to join. We're going to be doing these regularly, and I'd really encourage you to join that one and mark that in your calendars. And just some other events there to pick out. So we've got an infrastructure management GIS conference in Frankfurt. This previously has taken place in the US. It's come to Europe for the first time. We've got 15 presenters coming out from our UK customers are heading over to Frankfurt to represent Esri UK. And that's a 3-day event, which I think would be really valuable for those in the AEC, utilities and transport space. Oracle Labs, so this is where our partner Oracle, we're going to be in Reading all week for the Oracle Labs kickoff. Have a look on the Oracle website if you'd like to learn more about the labs and that technology centre. I'm sure many of you have been before and will know about our UK conference. This takes place on the 16th of May in London. We're back at the QE2. Again, it's free to join. It's the largest GIS conference in Europe. We hope to see many of you there, and you'll see many of the demos and things that we've talked about. You'll hear about the things that we talked about today in a little bit more detail through the course of that day. And then there are some other events like Next Build, which we're going to in London. That's a day event in conjunction with AEC Magazine. We've got the UC in San Diego, the user conference, which from a sustainability perspective may not be applicable to be there live in person from the UK, but now that event, and has been for the last few years, is fully virtual, so you can join online and watch that online. And we've got obviously a few more webinars coming in our webinar series, and there'll be further announcements on the dates for our Scottish and Welsh conference and our UK customer meetups as well. So lots to look out for. We're all over the place in 2023, so hopefully you can either join some of these events live in person or virtually, and we hope to obviously see you there. So I'm just going to spend the last kind of few minutes just looking at some of the questions that you've been sending in. So thank you for sending some of those in. Tash, are we okay just to flick to the questions that have come in?
I don't have a link for that, so I'm not sure if you're able to share.
Okay, that's not a problem. I can switch out to that. Just bear with me. So hopefully that is coming through for you. So Tash, I think the first question here is for you. Are you able to get UK HAB colours or patterns to display in ArcGIS Online or some of the field apps?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. So when you are downloading some of that data for UK HAB, you will get a layer file. So you will be able to see that symbology, and especially when you bring that into Pro. So I would say that this is something that you can achieve by bringing in an arcade script and then being able to push that into field maps. I have to say and be honest, there will be a little bit of a challenge there of actually creating that arcade script, but it's definitely possible for you to do, and potentially something that you may want to work with professional services team to make sure that that's executed correctly.
Perfect. Okay. The next question that we've got is there a way to create a form on field maps using an Excel spreadsheet like you do on when using Survey 123?
So it would be great to learn a little bit more about kind of the use case behind that. Obviously, you can bring in a form into Pro and convert that into a feature class, and then you could push that into a field maps. But if that's not answering your question, it'd be great if we could, send an email after the call to understand a little bit more of that process.
Perfect. Yeah, do send those questions in. Okay, so the next one is there a way to create sorry, it's just jumped up. Is there oh, it's moving around. Okay, I think I was here. What's the difference between using the Suite app and the ArcGIS Pro? I think that's a really good question, Tash.
Yeah, no, that is a great question. So our Suite application is an online app, which you can then go and use in the office and also in the field as well. So it's there to be deployed in the field. You can also use it offline. I would say one of the powerful things about Suite is that the data is valid at the point of capture, because it's got all of those business rules that you're building into it. Whereas ArcGIS Pro is our desktop application. So it's a really great tool for those who are GIS savvy and those who are in the office and possibly creating data and editing it in the back end. So the Suite is great as well for those non-GIS users. So yeah, no, it's a very great question, and maybe we can send some more resources as well post this webinar, those differences.
Perfect. Thanks, Tash. Can this session be recorded? Yes, it is being recorded, and it will be available online in the next 48 hours. So these are jumping around. Can you add condition assessment info into the UK Hub? Another one for you, Tash.
Yeah, so by that, I'm assuming you're talking about the data schema with UK Hub. So the way how we've added that conditional visibility in terms of those levels and it understanding when you're answering one specific question and it providing those answers in the next one is in ArcGIS Pro. I've used contingent values, which is a great way for understanding the data hierarchy of a really complex data schema. So I would recommend looking at those contingent values and also subtypes to build that into it.
Perfect. And I think we've got 1 minute left. So the last one I'm just going to read out here, I think, is for Emily. So Emily, what impact will the government's environment bill have on businesses, do you think?
I think the biggest impact is going to be on cost. So at costing, we've gone from having a goal of no net loss on site, and now we've got this 10% net gain. And with the biodiversity units costing between 10 and 20,000 per unit off site, I think that could be significant additional cost, especially for the size of some of the schemes that we work on. But this is part of the justification for creating the tool that we have. So hopefully, by implementing that tool as early as possible on our schemes, we can meet that 10% net gain while minimising costs and hopefully get those enhancements on site rather than off site.
Perfect. Okay, well, thank you, Emily, and thank you obviously for joining us today as well, Emily, and providing that presentation. We really appreciate it, and thank you as well to Tash and Ali, as I mentioned. And finally, thank you for all of you for joining us, whether you're live with us today or you're watching this back at a later date. We hope you found it a valuable and engaging session, and we hope to see you on the next AEC webinar. It's the last thing I say is we're going to send out a survey. It'll come through with the video for everyone that's registered. Just to get your feedback on how we did today, but more importantly, to give us your ideas and suggestions for what you'd like to see in the next webinar series, and what else we can obviously focus on moving forward. So thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you next time. Bye for now.